I was 14, maybe 15 years of age at the time. My sleep broke around 2 a.m. when there was a noise outside my door. It sounded more like people walking and talking, but more like in a mumbling voice. At first I thought it was my family still awake since it was the weekend. However, when you live with family members long enough, you begin to recognize them by their mere footsteps, let alone their distant voices. And this sounded like neither of them. I sat up on the bed and put my bedside lamp on, only to find it barely staying alive with a dim light for me to see in. Still drowsy and now grumpy that my sleep broke, I walked slowly on the cold floor towards my door. But something in me made me hesitant. My movements seemed to be slowing down even more, almost like my body was trying to get me to turn away. The mumbling became louder, but these weren't words being spoken, at least not any that I understood. With my hands trembling for an unknown reason, I grabbed the handle on my door and slowly opened it, just barely enough for my eye to poke through. My gut feeling was right. This wasn't my family outside my room. I saw a group of shadows passing by my door. 8 dark, shadowy feet floating by, yet there was no one standing there. This time the mumbling was distinctive, much louder and longer. My entire body felt cold and stuck. But who were these people in my home? However, I had to be brave. As quietly as possible, I knelt down under my bed and grabbed the baseball bat. Then I walked back towards the door and barged it open with as much force that I could muster. I jumped into the passage, holding the weapon in hand, ready to confront the intruders, but no one was standing there. No shadow reflections behind me or in front. Therefore, I walked towards the lounge, put the light on, and everything seemed to be in order. No people, no shadows, and certainly no more mumbling or whispering sounds. Was I hallucinating? Was this a form of sleepwalking that I didn't know of? But my paranoia got the better of me to behave in such a way. With my feet now ice cold, I checked on my family as they slept peacefully. The back and front doors were locked, the windows latched and tightly closed. No sign of trouble. However, when I walked back towards the passage and glanced to my right at the kitchen, I saw a shadow bolt across the window. It was so quick that if you blinked, you would miss it. That fear crawled on my skin again, but I shook it off. Just my mind playing tricks on me. I took a deep breath in and out. Then I used the toilet and made my way back to my room. This time, however, my door was closed. Strange, I remember keeping it open when I walked out. I also noticed from the gap in my door that my lamp was off, which meant the bulb fused. But I cannot explain the horror of what I saw when I opened my door. Someone was sitting on my bed. This dark, shadowy, humanoid figure sat with his legs crossed. He had no facial features, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, though, judging by the outline, I could tell that it was a man. Despite the darkness, the only thing I did see was his short, messy hair. He doesn't move, just sits there staring at me. I refused to look away with the fear that once I turned my head, this unknown being would jump at me. My hand moves around the wall without looking and turns the main switch on. Just like that, he was gone. My breathing was now heavier than before. The house was so quiet that I could hear my heart beating. Still, there was no way I was going to turn the light off. I entered the bed, refusing to look anywhere else but the bed, and I submerged myself entirely under the covers. My breathing still heavy and the fear has not yet left my body. Then, just like my lamp, the main light switch dies. My room was filled with darkness, with only the neighbor's light shining just a little bit of light through the blinds. The mumbling started again, an ominous, deep, monotone humming. With my head still under the covers and my eyes tightly shut, I could now hear footsteps in my room. More than one person. I can hear them breathing. Despite my eyes remaining closed, I could sense someone standing by my bedside and leaning over me. Softly, I can feel the breath on the covers. Now I hear the mumbling much closer to me. Slowly I feel the covers slipping from my grip. My phone was right next to me on my bedside pedestal, but what do? I could use the flashlight, but do I risk my cover in darkness and reach for my phone? What if they grab my hand? What choice do I have anyway? Then, at that moment, almost like they were reading my thoughts, they pulled the covers off me. My eyes remained closed, but much tighter this time. I had only a few seconds that I used to fumble and grab my phone. My flashlight turns on, but I dropped the phone in horror. The phone fell upside down as the light shone on my ceiling. And in my room, 15 shadow people were surrounding me. 6 of them were sitting on my bed. 4 of them were standing on each corner. 5 of them were crawling on the ceiling. My body was frozen. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The shadow people began moving closer towards me. Some of them float while the others walk slowly, like a predator hunting its prey. Shadows of darkness mumbling an ominous chant while their eyes glow white, same like the flashlight on my phone. Their eyes are tiny and round, but the rest of their features remain a mystery. However, I was so focused on the shadow people in front of me that I seemed to have miscounted. One more was standing behind my headboard. The same shadow person I saw earlier sitting on my bed. His hand reaches for my chest and grabs on my shirt as I struggle. Why can't I scream? Why can't I fight back? Why can't I move my body? And the last thing that I remember was being taken. As someone that has a phobia of clowns, writing a story called The Midnight Clown and narrating it at midnight is certainly not the smartest thing that I have done. I was on my way home from work, finished off a bit late at the university, and saying that I was tired would be an understatement. There were so many reports to get done. The lab needed to be spotless, and I found myself reaching home just before midnight. Once I parked the car, moving like a zombie, I walked towards the front door and felt my heart try to leave my chest. Someone just ran past the side of my house in the blink of an eye. Whatever tiredness that I did have left my body within a few seconds. The front door remained locked as I walked towards the side, seeing if there was anyone hiding in the bushes or behind the house. Then I walked slowly and carefully towards the corner as I could hear breathing. I knew there was someone standing there. The outline of the shadow behind the house was clearly visible, but who? Was something that I needed to find out. Just when I thought the night could not get any more spookier, I see a person's head tilting just like mine and peeking from around the corner of my house. This was a man dressed in a clown suit. The light didn't show me much. I only managed to see the white makeup on his face, his bushy hair which matched the reddish-orange eyes staring into my soul, and not forgetting the big red rubber ball over his nose. Fight or flight response. But when I blinked, the Midnight Clown vanished. This was no horror movie. I wasn't foolish enough to investigate. Instead, I made my way into the house as quickly as possible while closing the door behind me. For some strange reason, the phone lines were dead. I was going to report the incident of a spooky man dressed in a clown suit roaming around the neighborhood. This was also during a time where the killer clown craze was at an all-time high, with many people losing their lives in eerie encounters with them. That night, I really struggled to sleep. I kept seeing his face in my mind. I kept feeling those orange eyes watching me. However, it had been a long day and I needed to rest my eyes for just a bit. I slept for maybe an hour or two, and then I heard it. There was a tapping noise against my window. Outside was quite windy and the raindrops much heavier. Therefore, I thought it was one of the branches on the tree knocking against the window. I walked towards the window, still very sleepy, and opened the blinds. Then, shockingly, I fell backwards onto the carpet. The clown was outside my window, his long dirty nail of his forefinger slowly tapping the glass. This time, with my outside lights on, I managed to see him properly. His clothing looked handmade and multicolored, with turquoise and purple, while the frill around his neck was beige. His teeth were large and yellow and his purple tongue matched his lipstick. Still, he continued tapping against the glass, but this time towards the latch of the window. He wanted me to open it. His jaw was so widely open that I saw his rotten gums, as he may be laughing or smiling at me. The clown from side to side began rubbing his nose against the glass as the red rubber ball made a squeaking sound. The manner in which he tapped his fingernail against the window was far from gentle. He was getting impatient and used so much of pressure that I thought my window was going to shatter. He kept looking side to side, and maybe I was seeing things, but I felt like he was speaking to someone. But who? The streets were literally empty. Then he began punching and elbowing the window, and just before that I could sense it was going to break. He stopped. I kept a knife in my room and walked over to grab it. When I turned back at the window, I saw him running through the bushes. I thought I scared him off, but I was wrong. The frightening clown jumped over the fence of the neighbor's house to silence the dog from barking. I couldn't see that far, especially with the bushes in the way, though I did hear the dog squealing and moaning in pain, followed by the most ominous sound that I ever heard. Flesh and organs being ripped apart at a rapid speed. The night was then quiet, so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Once again, the phone lines were dead. There was no sign of the clown outside anymore. I turned the TV on and the news sent a broadcast message urging everyone in this neighborhood to stay in their homes and lock the doors. There were 2 serial killers on the loose. Twin brothers dressed as clowns that escaped the prison, roaming our street at night. I walked back towards my room window and saw the girl from across the street standing by hers. Her face was filled with fear as we speak to each other from window to window, only able to understand our body language. Then, I was the one filled with fear. I tried to tell her to look behind her. I tried to tell her the killer clown was standing a few inches away from her, but it was too late. He was holding a machete in his hand and swung it so violently, it took the woman's head clean off. I thought the creepy clown looked terrifying when he smiled, but I was wrong. This time he wasn't smiling. This time his face had an expression of nothingness. And then I had a sudden realization looking at the clown from across the street. In all the paranoia, I forgot to lock the back door. How foolish was I to forget the broadcast so easily? There were 2 clowns, not 1. How foolish was I, realizing too late the clown that I was looking at from across the street that just killed my neighbor was not the same one that I saw earlier. That clown was now standing behind me, breathing down my neck. I slowly turned around, trembling with fear, and there he was, inches away from my face. His smile was wider than before. His eyes were more red than orange, and his teeth much sharper but coated with blood. I don't know what was more terrifying, the fact that the last thing that I saw in my nightmare was his mouth opening wider than the width of my body, or maybe the fact that I woke up in the real world feeling like my body was dipped into a bathtub of razor blades. Or maybe the third thing. That morning when I woke up, there was a pamphlet in my mailbox that said tonight the circus was coming to town. The Kangaroo Monster. Sounds funny, doesn't it? An encounter with a giant animal monster, tiger, lion, bear, perhaps a werewolf or a ruthless vampire stalking you, waiting to sink their teeth into your neck would sound much scarier. However, I can assure you that even though I document all my lucid dreams and nightmares into a journal, this was one of them that I never would have forgotten. I found myself near the woods on a dark, gloomy day. The calmness of the lake beside me and the breath of fresh, cold air was enough for serenity to cover me like a blanket. How could I forget the beautiful, breathtaking mountain formations in the distance? The camping tent was behind me, and in front was a small fire, warming my hands as I wrote stories in my notebook. Whenever I did look up from the words on the page, I saw the mist cover the woods like a swarm of bees. And as my writing flowed, the quietness of the day was soon interrupted by a man's voice. 17, he shouted. His voice was filled with urgency, concern, and anxiousness. 17. I closed the book on my lap and tried matching the sound of his voice with my eyes, trying to spot where he was standing. My search was cut short when I saw a young man wearing a white lab coat and black-framed spectacles emerging from the musty woods. His hands cuffed the sides of his mouth, and the sound of his 17 call was louder than ever, but now filled with desperation. The man walked fast towards me, ruffling through the pockets of his lab coat. I gently moved the axe for the wood beside the tree stump that I sat on, making it easier to grab just in case the strange man pulled out a weapon on me. However, it was his ID. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was now prim and proper. "This might sound strange, but have you seen a large kangaroo wandering around? His name is 17. The tension that I had for grabbing the axe loosened from my body as I answered, "No, sir, no kangaroo around here." The lab coat man told me 17 was an animal of his, and this was the first time an experiment ran out from the lab. He left me his details and told me to call him if I saw anything resembling a kangaroo. I continued writing, not realizing how fast the time went by. More and more people entered the woods as they set up their camping tents. I unfortunately don't do well with socializing, since I find it difficult to connect with most people. Hence, while the fire was at a low smolder, I entered my camping tent to get some shut-eye. And then, everything changed. My explanation of what I heard could not do justice. It lasted for maybe 10 to 15 seconds, but in my mind, it felt like an hour. The noisy woods weren't filled with people laughing or talking anymore. It echoed with them being ripped apart. I could hear their limbs and flesh being eaten. Their blood-curdling screams were getting cut short, while their necks were being broken. I crawled out of the tent and grabbed my axe. The only visible light was the small flame from my fire. The other campfires in the woods were being put out. Yup, that's right, the weirdest part was seeing rain fall in the woods, dampening the fires, and yet there was no rain where I stood. Despite the darkness, I could still see water droplets falling onto the wood, now turned coal. I could see the smoke from the fires filling the woodland air. But where was the rain coming from, and where were all the people? With my flashlight in hand and my axe in the other, I decided to walk into the woods. The rain was now much louder, and I saw it concentrated into the center. Maybe what I heard earlier was all in my mind, since there were no bodies on the ground. But then, I saw what put out the fires. There were no bodies on the ground because I was looking at the wrong place. I also realized that the supposed rain I heard earlier was not rain at all. It was blood, dripping from the trees. The folk that were camping earlier were stuck in the branches, at least what was left of them. I saw hands, legs, heads, and torsos spread out throughout the woods, and then I saw the one responsible for doing it. This was the largest kangaroo I have ever seen in my life. It had to be somewhere between 5 to 6 meters or 16 feet tall. Its eyes were red and large like tennis balls. Its claws were at least 13 inches. Its teeth were long, thin, and razor-sharp like needles as blood dripped from them. The kangaroo monster began hopping from tree to tree as I ran towards the exit of the woods. This creature was so fast and large that I could hear the branches wanting to snap every time it landed. The kangaroo made an ominous growl that had so much of bass I felt it vibrating my skin. I can't remember how long I ran for, but all I know was that my legs started feeling like jelly. The monster then leaped from one of the trees and pounced on me. With its sharp claws, it took a swipe at my chest and ripped out the flesh. I winced in pain and took a swipe of my own using my axe. It got caught into the monster's neck as it gave a high-pitched cry. I saw this as the best chance to get back up on my feet and run. However, I wasn't entirely out of the woods. I was hiding behind the tree with my hand over my mouth. The lab coat man then entered the woods. 17, he calls out. Then I crouch down low and look from the side of the tree trunk. The kangaroo monster then hops towards him, with each hop covering 10 feet at a time. The lab coat man pets it and then proceeds to scold the kangaroo, sort of like how we would scold our pets for doing something wrong. I heard him whispering under his breath, saying how much of a mess this was, but he was thankful there were no witnesses. Then when he composed himself, he compliments the kangaroo monster by saying how proud he was for how many humans it killed. He takes out his notepad and writes something down, then ties a leash on the kangaroo monster and walks out the woods. And as I hide behind the tree, shocked at what I just witnessed, feeling the life slowly draining from my body, I can't help but think to myself, if this monster kangaroo was his 17th experiment, what the hell did the other 16 look like? I was 9 years old living at a friend's house for the holiday. His mom was one of the best people that I had the privilege of knowing. She treated me as if I was her own son. Miss Hannah was her name. Towards the end of the week on a Thursday summer afternoon, Miss Hannah took us out for ice cream. I never did like getting anything, especially when I felt like this kind woman had been taking care of me this entire holiday, but she insisted. While having our ice cream, we walked beside her as she spoke to the neighbors and the folk passing by that she knew. Then we stopped at one of the houses that had a yard sale. While she continued talking to the people behind us, my friend walked over towards the table, having his ice cream and looking at the items that he wanted to get. However, the lady in charge of the yard sale gave me the creeps. It had nothing to do with her old wrinkled skin or her long untidy hair, rather the vibe that she gave off. She smiled at me in a way that would otherwise be assumed as warm, but why did I feel absolutely terrified? Why did I feel my soul ache in a way? She leaned over the wooden table of items and I backed up. The old woman never said a word to me, just smiled at me for 5 seconds that felt like all eternity. Then she speaks to my friend about the items that caught his eye: an old toy car, a white-coated angel figurine with large wings, and a frisbee. Miss Hannah walked by, kindly greeted the old woman behind the wooden table, then purchased the items for her son. While Miss Hannah urged me to pick up something as well, I refused. Every fiber in my body just wanted to get out of there. The same night of the yard sale, my friend began behaving strangely. Sam was drawn to the yard sale items in his room. No matter how many times I asked him to put the Xbox on with me or just watch our favorite series at the time, he refused. Sam could not take his eyes off those items. He said it made him feel safe. A few nights passed and my friend stopped talking to me altogether. Miss Hannah was at work and I felt confused, scared and worried. I knew there was something wrong with the items in the room, but I just couldn't quite figure out what it was. "May I see them?" I had asked. Then my friend lashed out, leaping towards me and scratched my face. His eyes had dark circles around them and drool dripped from the sides of his mouth. When he spoke, his voice was deep and frightening. "Leave them," he says to me. "You can't have it. You've already taken my mother and now you want my toys as well." I wasn't even fazed by the scratch on my face. I was more concerned with the split-second change of appearance my friend had. His skin had become dark like charcoal, his eyes blood red and teeth long and sharp. When he returned back to normal, the spine-chilling sensation had covered my skin when I saw the strange marks on my friend's body. Dark patches of black and blue and bite marks that now turned purple. That night when Miss Hannah came home, I told her what happened. My friend denied everything, but the scratch mark on my face did not help his situation. His mom also noticed that his behavior seemed really off for the past few days. The boy had refused to eat, and even while being fed in bed, he would take the plates of food and smash it on the wall. Later that night, I heard a noise outside my room. I opened the door and saw my friend crawling in the passage like an animal. He makes his way into his mother's room, stands by her bedside while watching her sleep, then proceeds to strangle her. In an outrage, I grabbed him and pushed him to the floor. Then he walked towards the mirror and started banging his head against it. It started off slow, like someone being frustrated by something, but then it became violent. Shards of glass pierced his forehead, and yet he laughed the entire time. Miss Hannah then rushed him to the ER. As the holiday was coming to an end, my friend got out of hospital. He seemed much better, not just in his behavior but in appearance as well. No deep voice, no sunken eyes, and no dark circles around them. Surprisingly, the peculiar marks on his body disappeared as well. Miss Hannah and I felt relieved, but just to be on the safe side, the kind woman still chose to phone the priest to come over the next morning. That same night, when we went to bed, I heard a crackling sound in my friend's room. I got out of bed and walked towards his room and saw flames so high that it touched the ceiling. Sam tried screaming, but no sound left his voice. With tears in my eyes, I shouted out for Miss Hannah as panic filled my soul. 9 years old or not, I wasn't going to let my friend die. I barged into the room as the fire sizzled the skin on my body and rescued my friend from the burning room. However, I could have sworn when I looked in the mirror, I saw a demon's reflection behind me. A dark figure with horns on its head, red eyes and yellow, rotten teeth. With my eyes tightly shut, I pushed through, carrying my friend out the room like a soldier rescuing his fellow comrade. Miss Hannah ran to our aid when we exited the room. We tried putting out the fire while she frantically called the fire brigade. You would think the horror would have finally ended after that, but it didn't. We walked into the burned-down room and saw the remains of what little was left. Miss Hannah never cared about the room. She was just glad that her son and I were okay with minor injuries, of course. The firemen said they couldn't find any signs of what caused the fire. It just caught alight on its own. While Miss Hannah never cared about the room, I did. At least what was in it. The items from the yard sale in particular. The toy car was burned, the frisbee destroyed, but the angel figurine was not an angel figurine anymore. The white coating covering it had melted as well, revealing something far more sinister. A dark demon figurine with horns on its head, red eyes and rotten teeth. The same demon that I saw in the mirror. Now whether it was the creepy old woman that painted over the demon figurine disguising it as an angel, or whether it was sold to her that way, I never knew. But I made sure that I used a hammer and smashed it into a million pieces. That day when I left home at the end of my holiday, Miss Hannah drove past the house of the old creepy woman. She had the same evil smile, same foul teeth, and same eerie vibe. My body tensed up and I felt my chest much tighter when I saw the same angel figurine on the table yet again in her yard sale. How was that possible? I know that I destroyed it. I saw it leaving with a garbage truck. And as we exited the street, I turned behind me looking through the rear window, only to find yet another child picking up the angel figurine from the wooden table at the yard sale and taking it home. I moved into the house on the top of the street of a nice, quiet neighborhood. This was a small place, quite cozy, and even if it wasn't, it was all that I could afford. The previous owner was a middle-aged woman that up and left one day without taking her belongings. The neighborhood folk said that she was spooked out by the house down the street and left as soon as possible. Not even the portraits of herself on the wall were removed until I entered. At 18 years of age at the time, I rode my bicycle to the college and managed to get a job at the diner down the street on the weekends. Whenever I did pass the house in question, it never really looked eerie as such. This was a normal fancy house that looked like it had a ton of work done on it. The owner, a neatly dressed rich man with fancy cars parked outside, waved at me as I rode by. I saw almost all of the neighborhood folk outside his home, including police officers that carried freshly baked pastries, casseroles with cling wrap over the top, and bottles of wine. I rang the bell on my bicycle handle and waved back, but the young man chased after me. "Slow down, Flash," he says. "I am having a party tonight, and I want you to join us. Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood type of thing." Now, being an introvert, I knew this was disaster, but I gave a fake smile and thanked him for the invitation. If I finished early at the diner, I said I would be sure to join him. That was my way of saying no. Saturday night, 9 p.m., I rode back home, and upon passing the house, I saw the party still going on. I increased my speed, but they managed to see me. The neighborhood folk called out to me and gestured for me to join them. Awkwardly, I had no choice. After all, I just moved into the neighborhood. I locked my bicycle onto one of the wooden panels of the man's porch and entered. They were really nice folk, warm and welcoming. But then they brought up the house being haunted. So casually, they spoke about objects being thrown around the house at night and eyes peeking through the darkness watching them. I was baffled on how calm they were when they were telling me all of this. They explained to me that's the reason they have parties there, to capture paranormal moments on camera. The young man told me that I was welcome to take the tour of the house on my own. Of course, it felt awkward roaming around another person's house, even with their permission. However, it was still better than making small talk with so many other people. The house seemed really nice, very spacious, neat and tidy, and somewhat calming. And then I heard a sound towards my left. While the party was noisy, I could have sworn I heard someone knocking on the door. The door towards the left was slightly open, and there was nothing but darkness. I fidgeted for the light switch, and when I turned the light on, I said, "Hello? Hello? Hello? Hello?" The light only lit up the entrance of a long row of stairs leading down to a dark basement. I called out to the young man in the living room, but the music was too loud. What if someone was stuck in there? What if someone needed my help? What if the house was really haunted? I used the flashlight on my phone and walked down the wooden stairs as it made a creaking sound. The basement was really old and looked like the part of the house that wasn't improved on. When I made my way to the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight showed me multiple thick silver chains and locks on an old wooden double door. How strange. The chains weren't rusty, nor were the locks old. There were scratch marks and blotches of blood smudged on the door. The knocking sound happened again. "Is there someone in here?" I had asked. Now, whatever was on the other side banged against the door. Startled as ever, I backed away. My breathing hastened and my heart pounded against my chest. I heard a mumbling sound that I couldn't decipher whether it came from a man or a woman. The noise became louder, forceful, and more violent, and it was evident the chains and locks were meant to keep something in. Now, I truly believed the house was haunted. But why was I dumb enough to walk towards the door? I heard scratching, the chains rattling, banging, and something trying to push the door open. A quick glance around the dark, spooky, stuffy basement, and then I saw strange markings and writings in blood on every wall. Foolishly, as if my body was possessed by sheer stupidity, I started unraveling the chains and locks. At that moment, the party folk walked down the stairs with lanterns in hand. In my panic-stricken voice, I told them there's something behind the door. They said yes. They know. Then, the old basement double door was slowly pushed open. A woman with duct tape over her mouth had fallen to the ground. Her hands and legs were tied with rope and her chest was gashed open. The sounds I heard a few minutes ago were the last futile attempts of the remainder of her life. I looked further in the dark room behind the double door and saw corpses lying on the ground. Their rotting bodies were mutilated in the most horrific ways possible. The stench was just so foul that I threw up. The young man then walked behind me with an axe and placed his hand over my shoulder. The party folk in the basement all had an eerie smile plastered on their faces. Somehow my eyes remained on the ground looking at the deceased woman in front of me. I recognized her. This was the woman that previously owned the house that I currently live in. She was the same woman the neighborhood folks had up and left. The young man says to me, "Shh. Don't panic, it's going to be okay. Sometimes they are stronger than they look." Gently, he then rubs the cold steel of the axe head against my face. The people in the basement pull down the collar of their clothing at the same time, revealing markings carved into their skin. The same markings I saw written on the wall, in blood. As I stood there, frozen with fear, surrounded by these folk that I presumed to be so warm and welcoming, I realized that I never moved into a nice neighborhood. In fact, I moved into a cult.